I was 9 years old when I handed $10 to the most dangerous man in Chicago and asked him to make my uncle disappear. I found Marco Santoro on a bench in Grant Park, watching the lake like he was waiting for someone to finally have the courage to approach him. My hands shook as I gave him the worn envelope. Inside, a crumpled bill and a note in my messy handwriting. Please make my uncle go away. He hurts my mom and my sister. He didn't laugh. He didn't send me away. He just looked at me with eyes that had seen everything except maybe a child brave enough to ask a monster for mercy. That moment changed everything, not just for me, but for him too. You will feel so many emotions in this mysterious love story I'm about to tell. Please support us by clicking subscribe to the channel. I was 9 years old when I learned that monsters are just people who've forgotten how to be afraid. Grant Park stretched out before me like a green cathedral, the kind of place where families spread picnic blankets and children chase each other through the spray of fountains. But I wasn't there to play. I clutched the envelope so tightly that the worn paper dampened with sweat from my palm. $10 inside, folded around a note I'd written in my messiest cursive because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The ink had smudged where my tears fell while I wrote it. Please make my uncle go away. He hurts my mom and my sister. I knew exactly where to find him. Everyone in our Southside neighborhood knew Marco Santoro's routines. The way you know when a storm is coming, the way you feel thunder in your bones before you hear it. Tuesday afternoons, he sat on the bench overlooking Lake Michigan, away from his empire of dark suits and whispered threats. Alone. That's what I was counting on. My sneakers made soft sounds against the pathway. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of something I couldn't take back. I'd stolen the $10 from the coffee can under my mother's bed. Money she'd been saving for Emma's 13th birthday next month. Emma, who cried silently into her pillow every night. Emma, who'd stopped looking people in the eye. Emma, who flinched whenever Uncle Daniel's footsteps came down the hallway. He was exactly where I knew he'd be. Marco Santoro didn't look like a monster. That's what scared me most. He wore an expensive suit. I didn't know brands then, but I knew the fabric caught the light differently than anything I'd ever seen. His dark hair was graying at the temples. His hands rested on his knees, relaxed, like he had nothing in the world to fear. Maybe he didn't. When I stopped in front of him, casting a small shadow across his polished shoes, he didn't even look up at first. Sir? My voice came out smaller than I'd practiced. He lifted his gaze slowly, and I saw his eyes, dark, impossibly tired, but sharp. So sharp. They moved over me in one quick assessment. Worn dress from the church donation bin, shoes held together with duct tape, bruise on my arm from where I'd grabbed the table edge when Uncle Daniel threw a bottle at Mom last week. You should go home, little girl. His voice was quieter than I expected, almost kind. That made it worse somehow. I can't. Not yet. I thrust the envelope toward him before I lost my courage. He stared at it for a long moment, then at me. Something flickered across his face. Curiosity, maybe, or annoyance. He took the envelope. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might throw up right there on the pathway. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed. A dog barked. The world kept spinning while mine stopped completely. He opened the envelope with careful fingers, pulled out the $10 bill first, held it up to the light like he was checking if it was real. Then he unfolded my note. I watched his face as he read it, watched the way his jaw tightened, watched something change behind his eyes, something I was too young to name but old enough to recognize. When he looked at me again, I stopped breathing. Sit down. It wasn't a request. I sat. The bench was cold through my thin dress. He folded the note carefully, put it back in the envelope with the money, and turned his body toward me. What's your name? Lily Carter. How old are you, Lily Carter? 9, almost 10. And you think $10 is enough to hire me? His tone wasn't mocking. That's what surprised me. I'd expected laughter or anger or dismissal. Instead, he sounded genuinely curious, like I'd just asked him the most interesting question anyone had posed in years. It's all I have, but I'll pay you more later. When I grow up, I promise. Something cracked in his expression, just for a second, so fast I almost missed it. He looked away toward the lake, and I saw his throat work as he swallowed. Tell me about your uncle. So I did. I told him everything because I'd already crossed the line into impossible territory and there was no going back. I told him about the drinking, about Mom's bruises that she covered with makeup and long sleeves. I told him about the sounds Emma made when she locked herself in the bathroom. I told him about calling the police twice and how they'd come and gone and nothing ever changed because Uncle Daniel was charming when he needed to be, and we were nobody, and nobody listened to nobody's children. Marco Santoro listened to every word. He didn't interrupt, didn't check his watch or look away. When I finished, my throat was raw and my eyes burned, but I refused to cry in front of him. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Because everyone's afraid of you." I searched his face for a reaction. So maybe he'll be afraid too. The silence stretched between us like a living thing. A breeze came off the lake, smelling of water and distance. He reached into his jacket. I flinched, couldn't help it. But he only pulled out a phone, made a call, spoke in a language I didn't understand, quick and clipped, hung up, looked at me. "I'm going to ask you something important, Lily, and I need you to think before you answer. Do you understand what kind of man I am?" "Yes." "Do you understand what it means to ask me for this?" I thought about Emma's hollow eyes, about Mom's split lip last Thursday, about the way our apartment felt like a cage with the lock on the wrong side. "Yes." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, a decision made. "Go home. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. Not your mother, not your sister, not your friends. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "And Lily?" His voice stopped me as I stood to leave. "You don't owe me anything. Not now. Not when you grow up. You paid for something no one else ever has." "What's that?" My word to a child who needed help. I walked away on legs that barely held me, feeling his eyes on my back the entire way. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I'd either just saved my family or destroyed us all, and I wouldn't know which until it was too late to change anything. 3 days later, I found the card in my school bag, tucked between my math homework and the library book I was reading. Small, white, expensive paper. One word written in elegant handwriting I'd never seen before. Protected. My hands shook as I held it. I looked around the classroom, suddenly certain someone was watching me even though everyone was bent over their worksheets. The word seemed to pulse in my palm like a promise or a threat or maybe both at once. I slipped it into my pocket and tried to focus on long division, but all I could think about was that Marco Santoro had my note. Had my name, had my $10, had my desperate, impossible request, and somewhere in the city, my uncle had no idea that the most dangerous man in Chicago had just been hired by a 9-year-old girl with nothing left to lose. Things started changing so quietly that at first, I thought I was imagining it. Uncle Daniel came home late on Thursday, drunk as always, but different. Agitated. He slammed through the apartment muttering about people watching him, about phone calls from men he owed money to, men who'd never bothered collecting before. Mom looked at me across the kitchen table while he raged, her eyes asking questions I couldn't answer. I kept my face blank, focused on my spelling homework like nothing in the world mattered except getting necessary right on the practice test. Emma sat beside me, pencil frozen over her math problems. She'd stopped flinching quite so much when he came in, but only because lately he seemed more interested in pacing and drinking than in us. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing on ice and hearing it crack beneath your feet. That moment before you fall when you're not sure if the next step will hold. "Someone's fucking with me," Daniel said to no one in particular, gripping his beer bottle like he wanted to crush it. "Someone's talking to Tommy about the money, about the card games. Someone's—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring at the wall like he could see through it to whoever was orchestrating his unraveling. I bent lower over my homework, kept my breathing steady, thought about the white card hidden in the shoebox under my bed. Protected. The word haunted me. Protection sounded good in theory, in fairy tales, in movies, in the stories teachers read about knights and dragons. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was real life. And in real life, I was learning that protection could feel a lot like losing control of everything you thought you understood about the world. 2 days later, groceries appeared outside our apartment door. 3 bags, packed with actual food, fresh vegetables, real milk, bread that wasn't day-old discount, chicken breasts instead of hot dogs. Mom found them when she left for her early shift at the gas station. She brought them inside with shaking hands. "It's a mistake," she said, but she was already unpacking them, Already checking the receipt stapled to one bag. Says it's from Chicago Community Assistance. I never applied for. Maybe someone at church did it, I offered, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Mrs. Patterson was asking about us last week. Mom wanted to believe it. I could see her deciding to accept this impossible gift rather than question where miracles came from when you desperately needed them. Emma helped put things away, and for the first time in months, I saw her smile. Actually smile, as she pulled out a box of the cereal she loved, the kind we never bought because it cost twice as much as the generic. I went to the bathroom and stared at myself in the spotted mirror. Tried to see what Marco Santoro had seen when he looked at me on that bench. A skinny kid with 2 big eyes and a dress that didn't fit right. A girl holding $10 like it could buy salvation. Maybe it could. Maybe it had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed I shared with Emma and listened to her breathing, deep and even for once, not hitching with silent tears. In the next room, Mom and Daniel argued in harsh whispers. Something about a doctor's appointment Mom couldn't afford to miss, about the medication she'd been skipping because the copay was too high, about Daniel's job at the warehouse and how maybe he should pick up extra shifts instead of spending every evening at the card game above Murphy's bar. You don't get it, Daniel hissed. They're coming for that money. Tommy said if I don't have it by next week, then get it. I'm done covering for you. I'm done pretending this is okay. Her voice was stronger than I'd heard it in years. Something in my chest loosened, just slightly, enough to let me breathe a little deeper. The next morning, Mom's phone rang while we were getting ready for school. She answered it in the kitchen, her voice confused at first, then disbelieving. When she hung up, she stood completely still for a long moment. Mom? Emma asked. That was Chicago General Hospital. They said I've been accepted into some kind of treatment program for my condition, fully covered, starting next week. The silence in our cramped kitchen felt enormous. What program? Emma pressed. I never applied for anything. They said my doctor submitted the referral months ago, but Dr. Chen never mentioned. She trailed off, staring at the acceptance letter she'd pulled up on her phone, reading it over and over like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. I poured milk over my cereal, the good kind, the kind Emma had smiled about, and ate mechanically while my mind raced. This was bigger than groceries. This was systematic, organized. This was Marco Santoro keeping his word, and I didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. Uncle Daniel noticed too. He started coming home earlier, paranoid and sweating despite the October chill. He accused Mom of talking to people about him, about their life, about things that were private family business. She denied it because she didn't know there was anything to admit. He accused Emma and me of eavesdropping, of running our mouths at school. We stayed silent because what could we possibly say? I started noticing them then, the cars. Black sedans that appeared on our street at odd hours. Never the same one twice, but always the same feeling they gave me. Watchful, deliberate, there for a reason. They never stayed long. Just long enough for me to see them from our 4th floor window. Just long enough for Uncle Daniel to notice and start drinking earlier in the day. Someone's watching us, he said one night, standing at the window with the curtain pulled back. Someone's fucking watching us. Mom told him he was being paranoid. Emma avoided him entirely, spending more time in our room with the door locked. And I kept the white card under my pillow now, touching it sometimes in the dark like a talisman, like proof that I hadn't imagined everything. 3 weeks after I'd handed Marco Santoro that envelope, Uncle Daniel came home with a split lip and a black eye. He went straight to the bathroom, locked the door, and I heard water running for a long time. When he came out, he looked at Mom with something I'd never seen in his face before. Fear. We need to leave, he said. We need to get out of Chicago. What are you talking about? They know, Rebecca. They know about everything. The card games, the money I took from the warehouse, all of it. And they're not interested in payment plans or second chances. They want... He stopped, his eyes cutting to Emma and me standing in the hallway. For once, he seemed to remember we existed, that we heard things, that we understood more than he wanted us to. Go to your room, he said. Not angry this time, almost gentle. Now, we went. Pressed our ears to the door like we always did, straining to hear the conversation in harsh whispers and breaking glass. I caught fragments. Debt collectors. Knows where I work. California, Maybe Arizona? Can't take the girls? Not yet. Just need to. Emma grabbed my hand in the dark, squeezed so hard it hurt. Lily, she whispered. What's happening? I didn't know how to tell her that I'd set something in motion I couldn't control, that I'd asked a monster for help, and now we were living inside the consequences of that choice. That Uncle Daniel's fear should have felt like victory, but instead felt like standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. I think, I said slowly, things are going to get better. I think Uncle Daniel is going to go away. How do you know? Before I could answer, we heard it, the sound that would replay in my nightmares for years afterward. Uncle Daniel's voice, high and frightened. Please. No, please. Then silence. Then Mom's scream, sharp and short, cut off almost before it began. Emma and I burst from our room at the same time, running toward the living room. But when we got there, Uncle Daniel wasn't hurt. He was standing against the wall, hands raised, staring at the front door. Mom stood beside him, her hand over her mouth. The door was closed, but someone had slid something underneath it. An envelope. White. Expensive paper. Uncle Daniel stared at it like it was a snake coiled to strike. Mom looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the question forming in her eyes. The terrible, impossible question about how a 9-year-old girl could possibly have anything to do with the nightmare slowly consuming our lives. I crossed the living room, picked up the envelope. Uncle Daniel made a sound in his throat like he wanted to stop me but couldn't find the words. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message typed in neat, impersonal letters. You were chosen as a message. Leave Chicago within 48 hours, or become an example instead. My hands didn't shake as I read it. Maybe they should have. Maybe I should have felt something other than the cold satisfaction spreading through my chest. Uncle Daniel made that sound again, and when I looked up, I saw he was crying. Actual tears running down his face. This man who'd hurt my mother and my sister, reduced to trembling because someone had finally made him afraid. Lily, Mom said quietly, dangerously. What did you do? I met her eyes and saw she already knew. Somehow she already knew. Uncle Daniel left on a Wednesday. He packed one duffel bag while Mom watched from the doorway with her arms crossed, her face a mask I couldn't read. Emma and I pretended to do homework at the kitchen table, but we were really watching the way he moved. Frantic, clumsy, like an animal that knows the trap is closing. He kept glancing at the windows, at the door, at the shadows in the corners of our apartment, like they might come alive and swallow him whole. I should have felt triumph, victory, something clean and simple. Instead, I felt hollowed out, like I'd opened a door inside myself that I couldn't close again. Rebecca, he said, and his voice cracked on her name. I'm sorry. I know I can't. Just go, Daniel. Mom's voice was flat, empty. All the years of fear and pain compressed into 2 words that landed like stones in still water. He looked at Emma and me then. Really looked at us, for maybe the first time in the 3 years he'd lived with us. I saw him trying to find something to say, some explanation or apology that would make sense of what he'd become. But there was nothing. There had never been anything except his fists and his rage and his need to make someone smaller so he could feel big. Take care of your mom, he said to me specifically, and I hated that he could still pretend he'd been anything other than the reason she needed taking care of. Then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him with a sound like an exhale, like our apartment itself was breathing out poison it had been holding in its lungs for years. Mom stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. When she finally turned around, her eyes found mine with a precision that made my stomach drop. Kitchen. Now. Emma started to follow, but Mom shook her head. Just Lily. I walked into the kitchen on legs that felt disconnected from my body. Sat at the table where I'd done homework while planning how to hire a crime lord with money stolen from my mother's birthday fund. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh glow that left no shadows to hide in. Mom sat across from me, folded her hands on the table like she was praying or trying to keep them from shaking. I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the truth. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Did you have something to do with Daniel leaving? The question hung between us like smoke. I could have lied, should have lied, but I'd already crossed too many lines, and I was tired of pretending I was still the child I'd been before that day in Grant Park. Yes. Mom closed her eyes, breathed in deep through her nose. When she opened them again, there were tears tracked down her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. How? So I told her. Not everything. Not about the cars or the envelope under the door, or the way I'd started to recognize the invisible architecture of Marco Santoro's protection surrounding us, like a fortress I couldn't see. But I told her about the $10, about the note, about the man on the bench who'd listened to a desperate child and decided to keep his word. Mom listened without interrupting. When I finished, she put her face in her hands and cried, really cried. The kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep and wounded and finally safe enough to break. I didn't know what to do. I'd seen her cry before, but always quietly, always muffled into pillows or hidden in the shower. Never like this. Never free. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else. Don't. She looked up, tears still streaming but her voice fierce. Don't apologize for saving us. Don't you dare. She stood up, walked around the table, and pulled me into her arms so tight I could barely breathe. I felt her heartbeat against my ear, fast and hard and alive. When she finally let go, she gripped my shoulders and looked at me with an intensity that made me feel both younger and older than my 9 years. What you did was dangerous, Lily. Dangerous and impossible and, she laughed, a broken sound. And it worked. My God, it actually worked. Are you mad? I don't know what I am. Grateful, terrified, grateful. She said grateful twice, and I understood that she was trying to make it true, trying to override the fear with gratitude because gratitude was safer, easier, less likely to crack the fragile foundation we were standing on. That night, I slept deeper than I had in months. The next morning, everything changed again. Mom's phone rang at 7:15. She answered it in that confused, just-woke-up voice, then went completely still. I watched from the doorway as she listened, her free hand coming up to cover her mouth. I don't understand, she said finally. I never applied for... Yes, Dr. Chen is my physician, but... A long pause. Fully funded, but how? Another pause. Clinical trial. Research grant. Yes, I understand. When she hung up, she stood in our tiny kitchen with the morning light coming through the window, making her look younger than her 32 years. Emma appeared beside me, both of us waiting. Chicago General has accepted me into a treatment program, Mom said slowly, like she was translating a foreign language. For my autoimmune disorder. It's experimental, but they said my case is a perfect match for the research parameters. Transportation provided, all costs covered, starting Monday. Emma gasped and rushed forward to hug her. I stayed in the doorway, feeling that cold satisfaction again, the one that scared me because it felt too much like power, and I'd learned enough to know that power always had a price. The envelope arrived that afternoon, not slid under the door this time, but delivered by a man in a suit who knocked politely and handed it directly to my mother. She thanked him automatically, then stood holding it like it might explode. Inside was information about an apartment. A better apartment. 3 bedrooms in a building with a working elevator and a security door and windows that didn't rattle in the wind. A housing lottery we'd apparently won despite never entering. First month's rent waived, security deposit covered by a community assistance program. Mom swore she'd never heard of. This is impossible, she kept saying. This is absolutely impossible, but impossible things kept happening. Emma's school counselor called to say funding had materialized for specialized therapy, trauma counseling, the kind that cost $200 an hour but would now be free through a pilot program, one the district was running. Mom's job at the gas station suddenly received notice that she'd been promoted to assistant manager with better hours and actual benefits. Our bank account, which had been negative for 3 years straight, showed a system error refund that happened to equal exactly the amount Mom needed to catch up on bills. Miracles don't exist, but Marco Santoro apparently did. I started noticing him then, or maybe I just started looking. The black car parked across from our new apartment building on the day we moved in. The man in the expensive coat standing at the back of the hospital lobby when Mom went for her first treatment. The shadow at the edge of Emma's school parking lot during her orientation for the new therapy program. Never close, never threatening. Just there, watching. making sure his investment, no, his word, was being kept. 3 months after Uncle Daniel disappeared into whatever West Coast nightmare he'd fled to, I saw Marco Santoro up close for the second time. It was Emma's school concert, her first public performance since Daniel left. She'd joined the choir, found her voice again both literally and figuratively. Mom and I sat in the auditorium of Oak Ridge Academy, a school so far above our previous reality that I still felt like an imposter every time I walked through the doors. Mom kept touching her new clothes. Real clothes, not thrift store finds, like she couldn't quite believe they were hers. Emma sang a solo. Handel's Rejoice Greatly, her voice clear and soaring and heartbreakingly beautiful. Mom cried. I felt something enormous and inexpressible swelling in my chest. Pride and grief and gratitude all twisted together until I couldn't separate them. When the concert ended and the crowd filtered into the lobby for reception, I saw him. Marco Santoro stood near the back wall, partially hidden by a marble column. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching Emma as she laughed with her choir friends, watching Mom as she spoke with other parents like she belonged there, like she'd always belonged there. His expression was unreadable, but something about the set of his shoulders, the careful stillness of him, made me think of someone watching a painting they'd created, wondering if the brush strokes would hold. Our eyes met across the crowded room. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just held my gaze for 3 heartbeats before turning to leave. But I saw it in that brief connection, recognition, acknowledgement, something deeper than a transaction or even a promise kept. I left Mom talking with other parents and followed him, pushed through the ornate doors into the Chicago evening, where the first snow of the season was just beginning to fall. He stood beside a black sedan, his breath making clouds in the cold air. Mr. Santoro. He turned, looked at me with those same tired, sharp eyes that had assessed me on the bench in Grant Park 6 months ago. 6 months that felt like a lifetime. You shouldn't be out here without a coat, he said. You came. I keep my word. I know. I wrapped my arms around myself against the cold. I know you do. That's why I need to ask you something. He waited. Snowflakes caught in his graying hair, melted against the expensive fabric of his coat. Behind us, the sounds of celebration filtered through the academy's thick walls, muffled music, distant laughter, the sound of people who believed the world was safe and predictable and fair. Why are you still helping us? Uncle Daniel is gone. You did what I asked. So why the apartment and the medical care and all of it? Marco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, rougher, like he was dragging the words up from somewhere deep. 20 years ago, I was 8 years old and my father was killed over a debt he couldn't pay. My mother died 6 months later. No one helped. No one came. No one cared about one more broken family in a city full of them. He looked past me toward the academy, toward the life he'd given my family. You handed me $10 and a piece of paper, and you believed I would help you. Not because you were naive, but because you were desperate enough to bet everything on a stranger keeping his word. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? I shook my head. Trust is the only currency that can't be stolen or counterfeited. You gave it to me freely when I'd done nothing to earn it except be exactly what I am, a man everyone's afraid of. He turned back to me then, and I saw something raw in his face. You reminded me that I used to be the child asking for help, and this time, I got to be the one who answered. Snow fell between us like stars, like grace, like something I didn't have words for yet. I got you something, he said, reaching into his coat. He pulled out a small wrapped box. Inside was a library card, not just any card, but one for the Harold Washington Library downtown, with credit already loaded. $500, he said, for books, for knowledge, for whatever future you decide to build. I held the card like it was made of glass. Knowledge is the only power that's truly yours, he continued. No one can take it. No one can control how you use it. You understand? Yes, sir? He nodded once, satisfied, started to get in the car, paused with his hand on the door. Lily Carter, he said, and hearing my name in his voice felt like a benediction and a warning all at once. I won't always be watching. Eventually, you'll have to protect yourself. Be ready for that day. Then he was gone, the sedan pulling away into the snowy night. leaving me standing in the cold with a library card and questions I was only beginning to know how to ask. When I went back inside, Mom found me immediately. "Where did you go?" She brushed snow from my hair, then noticed what I was holding. "What's that?" "A gift," I said, which was true. From someone who believes in second chances. I looked at her, really looked at the color returning to her cheeks, the strength returning to her voice, the future opening before us like a door we'd thought was locked forever. And I understood something fundamental. Salvation always costs someone something. Marco Santoro had paid our debt with pieces of himself I'd never fully understand, and we'd paid with the comfortable lie that we could have survived on our own. Sometimes the only way to be saved is to admit you can't save yourself. Sometimes the only way forward is to accept help from the hands you were taught to fear. And sometimes, just sometimes, monsters are just men who remember what it felt like to be powerless, and who've decided that keeping a promise to one desperate child matters more than maintaining the armor that keeps them safe. That night, I added the library card to the box under my bed where I kept the white card that said, "Protected." 2 talismans. 2 promises. 2 pieces of evidence that I had changed something in the world, and the world had changed something in me. Outside my window, snow continued to fall over Chicago, covering everything in white, clean and new and full of terrifying possibility. I turned 13 the year I stopped being afraid of Marco Santoro and started being afraid of what it meant that I wasn't afraid of him. 3 years had passed since that snowy night outside Oak Ridge Academy. 3 years of invisible guardianship, of opportunities that appeared like clockwork, of a life that had transformed so completely that sometimes I forgot what it felt like to go to bed hungry or wake up to shouting. Mom was healthy now, genuinely healthy. Her autoimmune disease in remission, thanks to treatments that shouldn't have been available to someone without insurance or connections. Emma was thriving at Northwestern on a scholarship that covered everything, studying social work because she wanted to help girls like we used to be. And me? I was top of my class at Oak Ridge, fluent in 3 languages, captain of the debate team, and so thoroughly assimilated into this world of privilege that my old life felt like something I'd watched in a movie rather than lived. But Marco Santoro remained a shadow at the edge of everything, never intrusive, never demanding, but always, always there. Until the day he wasn't. It started with small things. The black car that usually appeared on the first Tuesday of every month stopped coming. The coincidental opportunities dried up. For 2 months, there was nothing. No sign, no signal, no invisible hand smoothing the rough edges of our lives. Mom didn't notice because by then we were stable enough to stand on our own. Emma didn't notice because she was consumed with college and falling in love with a pre-med student named James, who made her laugh in ways I'd never heard before. But I noticed. God, I noticed. I told myself it was relief. That I should be grateful for the space, for the return to normalcy, for proof that we could survive without a crime lord's protection. Instead, I felt abandoned in a way I couldn't explain to anyone, least of all myself. How do you tell your mother you miss being watched over by a man whose name makes grown men flinch? How do you admit you've come to depend on protection you never asked for? Beyond that first, desperate request in Grant Park? I made the call on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting on the floor of my bedroom with my phone clutched so tight my knuckles went white. The number Marco had given me 3 years ago, the one I'd memorized but never used because he'd always anticipated our needs before we could voice them. It rang 4 times before he answered. Lily. Just my name. But hearing his voice after 2 months of silence made something inside me crack open. Why did you stop? Silence on the other end. I heard background noise. Voices speaking in Italian, the clink of glass, music playing low. He was somewhere public, somewhere that belonged to his other life. And I'd interrupted. Stop what? Watching, helping. Whatever you call what you've been doing for 3 years. More silence. Then a door closing, the background noise cutting off abruptly. Because your family doesn't need me anymore. You're stable, safe. That was always the goal. You didn't ask if we wanted you to stop. I don't ask permission to protect people, Lily. And I don't ask permission to stop when the job is done. His tone was measured, professional, like I was just another item on a very long list of obligations. It made me furious in a way I didn't fully understand. So that's it. You're just gone. After everything. After everything, You're 13 years old with a full scholarship to one of the best schools in Chicago, a healthy mother, and a sister in college. That's not nothing. That's the entire point. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that protection wasn't just about money or opportunities or making problems disappear, that somewhere in the last 3 years, his presence had become a constant I'd built my sense of safety around, that I missed knowing someone was watching, even if I never saw him. That abandonment by a guardian I'd never officially had somehow hurt worse than abandonment by people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But I was 13, and I didn't have words for any of that yet. I need to see you, I said instead. Why? Because you don't get to decide you're done without at least saying goodbye. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, Lincoln Park. The bench where we first met. Saturday at 2. He hung up before I could respond. Saturday came wrapped in the kind of crisp spring weather that makes Chicago bearable. Sun bright enough to hurt, wind sharp enough to remind you winter's not quite done. I took the bus to Grant Park even though Mom had offered to drive me, needing the time to figure out what I wanted to say. The park looked different in daylight, in spring, without the weight of desperation making everything feel like a final gamble. Marco was already there when I arrived, sitting in the exact spot where I'd handed him that envelope 3 years ago. He looked older, more gray in his hair, new lines around his eyes, but still carried himself with that particular stillness that made people instinctively keep their distance. He wore jeans and a simple black sweater, almost casual, but even dressed down, he radiated a kind of controlled power that made my throat tight. I sat beside him without asking permission, felt him tense slightly, then relax. We stared out at the lake together, the water choppy with wind, throwing light back at the sky in 1,000 fractures. You came, I said. I keep my word. I know. That's the problem. He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I saw surprise flicker across his face. I'd grown in 3 years, not just taller, but sharper somehow, more defined. I wasn't the desperate 9-year-old who'd approached him anymore. I was something else and someone else, and we both felt the shift in the air between us. What problem? I gathered my courage like stones in my fist. You taught me to expect protection, to depend on someone watching over us. And then you just disappeared without warning, without explanation, like we were a project you finished and filed away. That's not... Let me finish. My voice came out harder than I intended, but I didn't soften it. Couldn't... He closed his mouth and nodded once, conceding the floor. You kept your word. You did everything you promised and more. But you also taught me something dangerous, that it's possible to feel safe, truly safe, for the first time in your life. And then you took it away to prove a point about independence or completion or whatever justification makes sense in your world. The words tumbled out faster now. 3 years of unexamined feelings spilling over like water from a broken dam. I'm grateful. God, I'm so grateful I don't have words for it. But I'm also angry because you made decisions about my family's life without consulting us. You decided when to help and when to stop helping, and we just had to accept whatever you chose because we never had any power in this arrangement. We still don't. Marco absorbed this quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finally stopped talking, breathing hard like I'd run a marathon, he was quiet for a long time. The wind whipped around us, carrying the smell of lake water and distant food trucks. You're right, he said finally. I blinked. I'd expected denial or explanation or the kind of smooth dismissal powerful men are good at, not agreement. I made choices for you without asking. I did it because I thought I knew better, because that's what I do. I see problems and I fix them. But you're not a problem, Lily. You never were. He shifted to face me more fully, and I saw something vulnerable in his expression, something raw that didn't fit with everything I thought I knew about Marco Santoro. I stopped watching because I was scared. Of what? Of what it meant that I couldn't stop. That 3 years had passed, and I still checked on your family every week. That I knew your debate schedule and your mother's hospital appointments and your sister's class schedule. That I cared about people I had no right to care about. The admission hung between us like confession, like truth too dangerous to speak aloud but too heavy to keep carrying. In my world, Lily, caring about people makes them targets. Weakness is currency that enemies spend without hesitation. The more I watched over you, the more I painted targets on your backs. So I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because I thought it was safer for everyone. I processed this slowly, feeling the shape of it settle into place. That's stupid. He laughed. Actually laughed, a sound so unexpected I startled. Probably, but I'm better at violence than vulnerability, so stupid seemed safer. We sat with that for a while, watching joggers pass and dogs chase frisbees and the ordinary chaos of a city park in spring. Finally, I spoke. I have rules. If this is going to continue, if you're going to be part of our lives in any way, I need you to follow my rules this time. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe. Respect. I'm listening. Rule 1. No more decisions without telling us. If something needs to happen that affects my family, you tell us first. We get to choose whether to accept help. Agreed. Rule 2. No more disappearing. I don't need you watching over us every day, but I need to know you're reachable. That if something happens, you'll answer. Agreed. Rule 3. You tell me the truth, always. Even when it's ugly or complicated or makes you look bad. No more noble lies about what's best for us. Marco studied me for a long moment, and I watched him see me, not the child I'd been, but the person I was becoming. Someone who'd learned from his example that power wasn't just about control, it was about boundaries. That protection without autonomy was just another kind of prison. Those are good rules, he said quietly. Fair rules. I accept them. Good. Because I have one more. I'm listening. I took a breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. Rule 4. You let me care about you too. This doesn't get to be one-directional anymore. You don't get to be this mysterious guardian who swoops in to fix things and then vanishes. If we're going to be in each other's lives, it has to be real. Mutual. That means I get to ask how you are. I get to worry about you. I get to matter to you in a way that you're willing to acknowledge out loud. The silence that followed was enormous. Marco's expression shifted through several emotions I couldn't name. Surprise, resistance, something that looked almost like fear. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than I'd ever heard it. That's a dangerous rule, Lily. I know. If you matter to me in a way that's public, in a way that's acknowledged, you become leverage. You become a target in ways you can't imagine. Then I guess you'll have to be better at protection than you are at disappearing. He stared at me like I'd just spoken a language he was still learning to understand. Then, slowly, something in his face softened. Just slightly. Just enough. You're negotiating with a crime lord like you're in a board meeting. You taught me to value my worth and never accept less than I deserve. Those were your words, in the book you sent me last year. Remember? He did remember. I saw it in the way his eyes widened slightly, in the recognition that he'd created something he hadn't anticipated. A child who'd learned his lessons too well, who understood power not as domination but as the ability to set terms for your own life. Okay, he said finally. Your rules. All 4 of them. I agree. Say it out loud. All of them. He took a breath, and when he spoke, each word felt like a promise being carved into stone. I will not make decisions about your family without consulting you first. I will remain reachable. I will tell you the truth, even when it's difficult. And I will acknowledge that you matter to me in ways that make me vulnerable. And I will let you care about me in return. Hearing it spoken aloud changed something between us. The dynamic shifted, no longer guardian and child, not quite equals, but something new and undefined. A relationship with its own gravity, pulling us into orbit around each other in ways neither of us fully understood yet. I have rules too, he said. I nodded, fair being fair. 3 rules. First, you focus on your education and your future. Nothing I do, nothing you learn about my world, interferes with that. The goal is always for you to build a life that doesn't need me. Agreed. Second, if I tell you something is dangerous, you trust me. No debate, no argument. My world has edges that will cut you before you see them coming. Agreed. Third, you never, ever try to protect me by keeping secrets. If something happens, if someone threatens you, if you're scared or confused or in over your head, you tell me immediately. The silence is what kills people in my world. His voice on that last rule was iron, unyielding, and I understood that this was non-negotiable in a way the others weren't. I agree. We shook hands like business partners sealing a deal, his grip firm but careful, mindful of the gap between his strength and mine. When he released my hand, something had fundamentally changed. We'd named the thing between us, given it structure and boundaries and mutual consent. We'd turned protection into partnership, obligation into choice. "Can I ask you something?" I said as he stood to leave. "Always." "Why me? Why my family?" "You must get 100 desperate requests. People must ask you for help all the time. So why did you keep your word to a 9-year-old girl with $10? Marco looked out at the lake for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something too painful to look at directly. "Because you believed I would help when I'd given you no reason to believe it. Because you looked at a monster and saw someone who might still remember what mercy felt like. Because in that moment, you knew me better than I knew myself." He started to walk away, then turned back. "And because keeping my word to you felt like keeping a promise I'd made to a different child a long time ago. One who died alone and scared because no one came when he needed them. Saving you meant I got to save him too, even if it was 20 years too late." Then he was gone, walking away through the spring afternoon while I sat on the bench where everything had started and tried to process the impossible weight of being someone's second chance at redemption. That night, I found a package outside our apartment door. Inside was a phone, sleek, expensive, with only one number programmed into it. No name, just a number I already knew by heart, and a note in that elegant handwriting. "For Rule 2, call anytime. I'll answer." I added it to the box under my bed with the library card and the white card that said protected. But this felt different. This wasn't a gift or a promise. This was access. This was trust. This was Marco Santoro handing me a piece of power I hadn't asked for. The power to reach him, to matter to him, to exist in his world as something more than a project or a debt. I turned the phone over in my hands and thought about rules and boundaries and the strange mathematics of mutual care. About how sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't asking for help, but demanding the right to give it in return. Outside my window, Chicago glittered with a million lights, each one a story, a struggle, a person trying to survive in a city that didn't promise mercy to anyone. But somewhere in that vast darkness, I knew Marco Santoro was doing the same thing I was, holding a phone that connected to only one number, wondering if he'd just made a mistake or finally done something right. The difference was, this time we'd chosen it together. And that made all the difference in the world. I was 16 when I learned that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, thin, official-looking, with a return address I didn't recognize. Mom opened it at the kitchen table while I made coffee, her hands steady until she started reading. Then everything changed. The color drained from her face. The paper slipped from her fingers and drifted to the floor like a white flag of surrender. I picked it up before she could stop me. Parole hearing scheduled for Daniel James Carter. As registered victims, you have the right to submit an impact statement or appear in person. Hearing date, November 15th. The words blurred together, rearranging themselves into something impossible. Uncle Daniel, parole, hearing. Each word a small detonation in my chest. He's in prison. My voice came out strangled. This whole time, he's been in prison? Mom's silence was answer enough. I stared at her, at this woman I thought I knew completely, and saw a stranger holding secrets that changed the entire architecture of our past. "California," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He got arrested 6 months after he left Chicago. Armed robbery. The prosecutor said he was desperate, that he owed dangerous people money and tried to steal it instead of earning it." The coffee maker beeped. Neither of us moved. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. "The prosecutor's office contacted me 2 years ago. Victim notification. I didn't tell you because I thought—" She stopped, pressing her palms against her eyes like she could push the memories back inside. "You thought what? That I wouldn't find out? That keeping secrets was protecting me?" I heard the edge in my voice. Sharp and cutting. Rule 3 echoed in my head. The truth, always the truth, even when it's ugly. But that was Marco's rule for himself, not Mom's. And the unfairness of my anger sat bitter on my tongue. "I thought you deserved to forget him," she said. "I thought you deserved to grow up without carrying his shadow." Was I wrong? I didn't know how to answer that. For 7 years, I'd believed Uncle Daniel had simply run away. fled Chicago, and disappeared into whatever coastal anonymity men like him find when their sins catch up to them. It had been enough. Clean. Simple. But prison meant something different. Prison meant consequences and confined spaces and the possibility of return. Prison meant he'd been caged all this time, and someone had held the key. The thought formed slowly, ice crystallizing in my veins. Marco knew. I grabbed my phone, the one with the single programmed number, and left the apartment before Mom could stop me. Called him from the stairwell where the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects and graffiti-covered walls that had seen too much. He answered on the first ring. Lily. You put him in prison. Silence. Then, carefully, I ensured he faced consequences for his actions. There's a difference. No, there isn't. You told him to leave Chicago or become an example. He left, and then you made sure he became an example anyway. I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. The robbery wasn't fabricated, Lily. He committed that crime on his own. I simply ensured the investigation was thorough and the evidence reached the right people. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the concrete steps. Phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. You lied to me. I withheld information I thought would hurt you. That's not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. My voice echoed in the stairwell. Too loud, too raw. I heard him breathe on the other end. Slow, measured, like he was counting to 10 in a language I didn't speak. You're right, he said finally. Rule 3. The truth, even when it's ugly. I broke my own rule because I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong. The apology should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on ground that kept shifting beneath my feet, like nothing was solid anymore, like every truth I'd built my life around was actually just a prettier version of a lie. He's up for parole, I said. I know. Of course you know. You probably knew before we did. 3 days before. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. I laughed, a sharp, broken sound that had nothing to do with humor. Now there's a problem you can't fix, right? You can't make parole boards disappear. You can't orchestrate outcomes in courtrooms. You're just a person who has to wait and hope like everyone else. The silence on the other end felt different this time. Heavier. Actually, he said slowly, I can do all of those things, but I won't. Not without asking you first. That's rule 1, remember? And there it was. The question underneath the question. The choice I demanded the right to make. Marco Santoro was offering to fix this problem the way he fixed everything, with pressure and influence and the kind of power that operated in shadows most people never saw. All I had to do was ask. What would you do? I whispered. I would ensure the parole board understands exactly who Daniel Carter is. I would make certain they have access to every detail of his history. The domestic violence reports that were filed and dismissed, the hospital visits, the complaints from neighbors that went nowhere. I would have witnesses testify who were too afraid to speak before. I would paint a picture so complete and damning that parole would be impossible. That's not fair, I said, and immediately hated myself for saying it. He served his time for the robbery. He doesn't deserve to be punished forever for things he was never convicted of. He deserves exactly what he earned through his choices. Nothing more, nothing less. Marco's voice was calm, reasonable, and utterly certain. And that certainty terrified me because part of me wanted to embrace it, wanted to say yes, do it, make sure he never gets out, make sure we never have to be afraid again. But another part of me, the part that had learned to negotiate rules and demand truth and insist on autonomy, understood that accepting Marco's help with this would mean accepting that some problems were too big for normal solutions, that sometimes justice required a thumb on the scale, that protection and manipulation were just different words for the same thing. I need time, I said. I need to think about what's right. How much time? I don't know. Days, weeks, however long it takes. The hearing is in 3 weeks, Lily. After that, the decision is made and there's no taking it back. Pressure. He was applying pressure even while pretending not to, and I resented him for it even as I understood why. Then I have 3 weeks, I said firmly. Rule 1. Marco. No decisions without consulting me first. That includes decisions about timelines and pressure and when I need to choose. A pause. Then something that might have been respect in his voice. You're right. Take whatever time you need. I'll wait. And if I decide I don't want your help, if I decide to let the process play out naturally, then I respect that choice and do nothing. That's what rules mean. Lily. They apply even when they're inconvenient. We sat in our respective silences, me on the cold concrete steps, him wherever crime lords went when they had to confront the limitations of their power. Finally, he spoke again. Can I tell you something? Always. 7 years ago, when you handed me that envelope, I made you a promise. I've kept that promise in ways you know about and ways you don't. But the promise wasn't just to remove your uncle. It was to give you a life where you never had to be afraid again. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. If he gets out, you'll be afraid. Maybe not immediately, maybe not consciously, but the fear will be there. A shadow in every parking lot, every unexpected knock on the door, every time your mother comes home late. I can take that fear away permanently. I can give you peace, but only if you ask me to. The manipulation was so smooth I almost didn't recognize it. Almost. That's not fair, I said again, but this time my voice was steadier. You're making this about fear instead of justice. You're making me choose between safety and principles, and that's a false choice designed to make me pick safety. Is it false? Or is it just honest? I closed my eyes, pressed my forehead against my knees, and tried to find solid ground in a world that kept liquefying beneath me. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. And when I do, I'll call you. I'll be waiting. I hung up before he could say anything else, before his logic and his protection and his absolute certainty could erode what was left of my ability to think clearly. When I went back upstairs, Mom was still sitting at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her like evidence at a crime scene. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red but dry. "What do we do?" she asked. And I realized that for the first time in 7 years, she was asking me, not telling me, not protecting me, but genuinely asking what I thought we should do. I sat down across from her and took her hands. We figure out what justice actually means. Not revenge, not safety at any cost, but real justice. And then we make a choice we can live with. And if we can't figure it out, I thought about Marco waiting for my call, about Uncle Daniel in a California prison counting days until a hearing that would determine his future, about Emma who didn't even know this was happening, about all the ways our past kept reaching forward to shape our present. Then we'll make the best choice we can with the information we have. That's all anyone can do. Mom squeezed my hands, and in that moment, I saw her clearly. Not as a victim who needed saving or a mother who needed to be protected, but as a woman who'd survived impossible things and was still trying to figure out how to live with the scars. Outside our window, Chicago blazed with afternoon light, indifferent to our small crisis, indifferent to the impossible choices people make every day in the space between revenge and mercy. Somewhere in that vast city, Marco Santoro waited for my call. And somewhere in a California prison, Uncle Daniel Carter waited for a hearing that would determine whether his past was finally, truly over, or whether it was just beginning again. I was 16 when I learned that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, thin, official-looking, with a return address I didn't recognize. Mom opened it at the kitchen table while I made coffee, her hands steady until she started reading. Then everything changed. The color drained from her face. The paper slipped from her fingers and drifted to the floor like a white flag of surrender. I picked it up before she could stop me. Parole hearing scheduled for Daniel James Carter. As registered victims, you have the right to submit an impact statement or appear in person. Hearing date, November 15th. The words blurred together, rearranging themselves into something impossible. Uncle Daniel, parole. Hearing, each word a small detonation in my chest. He's in prison. My voice came out strangled. This whole time, he's been in prison. Mom's silence was answer enough. I stared at her, at this woman I thought I knew completely, and saw a stranger holding secrets that changed the entire architecture of our past. California, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He got arrested 6 months after he left Chicago, armed robbery. The prosecutor said he was desperate, that he owed dangerous people money and tried to steal it instead of earning it. The coffee maker beeped behind me. Neither of us moved. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. The prosecutor's office contacted me 2 years ago. Victim notification. I didn't tell you because I thought... She stopped. pressing her palms against her eyes like she could push the memories back inside. I thought you deserved to forget him. That you deserved to grow up without carrying his shadow. I heard the edge in my voice before I could soften it. Was forgetting ever really an option? She looked up at me then, and I saw the answer written in the lines around her eyes, in the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was protecting something fragile inside her chest. No, forgetting was never an option. We'd just gotten better at pretending. I grabbed my phone, the one with the single programmed number, and left the apartment before Mom could stop me. Called him from the stairwell where the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects and graffiti-covered walls that had seen too much suffering to care about one more crisis. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. Lily, you put him in prison. The silence that followed felt deliberate, calculated. When Marco finally spoke, his voice was careful. I ensured he faced consequences for his actions. There's a difference. No, there isn't. You told him to leave Chicago or become an example. He left, and then you made sure he became an example anyway. The robbery wasn't fabricated, Lily. He committed that crime on his own. I simply ensured the investigation was thorough and the evidence reached the right people. I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the concrete steps, phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. My free hand clenched into a fist, nails biting into my palm. You lied to me. I withheld information I thought would hurt you. I was trying to... Rule 3, Marco. The truth, even when it's ugly. You broke your own rule. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. When he spoke again, his voice carried something I'd rarely heard from him. Vulnerability? You're right. I broke my own rule because I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong. The apology should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on ground that kept shifting beneath my feet. Like every truth I'd built my life around was actually just a prettier version of a lie. He's up for parole, I said. I know, I've known for 3 days. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. I laughed, a sharp, broken sound that had nothing to do with humor. Now there's a problem you can't fix with phone calls and pressure, right? You can't make parole boards disappear. Actually, he said slowly, I can do all of those things, but I won't. Not without asking you first. That's rule 1, remember? And there it was. The question underneath the question. The choice I'd demanded the right to make. Marco Santoro was offering to fix this problem the way he fixed everything. With pressure and influence and the kind of power that operated in shadows most people never saw. All I had to do was ask. What would you do? I whispered. I would ensure the parole board understands exactly who Daniel Carter is. I would make certain they have access to every detail of his history. The domestic violence reports that were filed and dismissed, the hospital visits, the complaints from neighbors that went nowhere. I would have witnesses testify who were too afraid to speak before. I would paint a picture so complete and damning that parole would be impossible. My throat tightened. That's not fair. He served his time for the robbery. He doesn't deserve to be punished forever for things he was never convicted of. He deserves exactly what he earned through his choices. Nothing more, nothing less. Marco's voice was calm, reasonable, and utterly certain. And that certainty terrified me because part of me wanted to embrace it, wanted to say yes, do it, make sure he never gets out, make sure we never have to be afraid again. But another part of me, the part that had learned to negotiate rules and demand truth and insist on autonomy, understood that accepting Marco's help with this would mean crossing a line I couldn't uncross. It would mean accepting that some problems were too big for normal solutions, that sometimes justice required a thumb on the scale. I need time, I said. I need to think about what's right. How much time? I don't know, however long it takes. The hearing is in 3 weeks, Lily. After that, the decision is made and there's no taking it back. Pressure. He was applying pressure even while pretending not to, and I resented him for it even as I understood why. Then I have 3 weeks. Rule 1, Marco. No decisions without consulting me first. That includes decisions about when I need to choose. A pause. Then something that might have been respect in his voice. You're right. Take whatever time you need. I'll wait. And if I decide I don't want your help, if I decide to let the process play out naturally, then I respect that choice and do nothing. That's what rules mean, Lily. They apply even when they're inconvenient. I closed my eyes, pressed my forehead against my knees. Can I tell you something? Always. I don't know who I'm supposed to be in this moment. The girl who's grateful you saved us, or the person who's supposed to believe in justice and redemption. I don't know how to hold both those truths at the same time. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe you can be both, grateful for the past and uncertain about the future. Maybe that's what growing up means, Lily. Learning to live in the space between certainty and doubt. The wisdom in his words surprised me, coming from a man whose entire life was built on certainty, on decisive action, on never second-guessing the choices he made. I'll call you when I decide, I said. I'll be waiting. I hung up and sat in the stairwell for a long time, listening to the building settle around me, pipes groaning, doors slamming, the distant sound of someone's television bleeding through thin walls, all the ordinary sounds of people living ordinary lives, people who probably never had to decide whether to unleash a crime lord on their past or let justice take its imperfect course. When I finally went back upstairs, Mom was still sitting at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her like evidence at a crime scene. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red but dry. "What do we do?" she asked. And I realized that for the first time in 7 years, she was asking me, not telling me, not protecting me, but genuinely asking what I thought we should do. I sat down across from her and took her hands in mine. We figure out what justice actually means. Not revenge, not safety at any cost, but real justice. And then we make a choice we can live with. What if we can't figure it out? I thought about Marco waiting for my call, about Uncle Daniel in a California prison counting days until a hearing that would determine his future, about Emma who didn't even know this was happening yet. Then we'll make the best choice we can with the information we have. That's all anyone can do. Mom squeezed my hands tight, and in that moment I saw her clearly. Not as a victim who needed saving, or a mother who needed to be protected, but as a woman who'd survived impossible things and was still trying to figure out how to live with the scars. Outside our window, Chicago burned with afternoon light, indifferent to our small crisis, indifferent to the impossible choices people make every day in the space between revenge and mercy. Somewhere in that vast city, Marco Santoro waited for my call. And somewhere in a California prison, Uncle Daniel Carter had no idea that his fate rested in the hands of the 9-year-old girl he'd terrorized, now 16 and holding more power than he'd ever wielded through violence. The decision came to me at 3 a.m, the way truth often does, in the darkness when you can't hide from yourself anymore. I called Marco from my bedroom floor, surrounded by research I'd spent 2 weeks compiling, court documents, parole board statistics, articles about rehabilitation and recidivism, stories of survivors who'd forgiven their abusers and survivors who never could. I'd tried to find an answer in data, in logic, in some external authority that could tell me what was right. But morality doesn't live in statistics. It lives in the space between what we want and what we can live with. He answered immediately, voice alert despite the hour. "I want you to do it," I said. "I want you to make sure he stays in prison." Silence. Then, "Are you certain?" "No, but I'm deciding anyway. That's what being an adult means, right? Making choices when you're not certain, when there's no perfect answer, only the least terrible option. Lily, if you have doubts, I'll always have doubts. That's the point. I don't get to make this choice and feel clean about it. But I'm making it anyway because Emma shouldn't have to testify, because Mom shouldn't have to relive her trauma in front of strangers, because sometimes protection matters more than principle." I heard him breathing on the other end, considering my words with the weight they deserved. "This isn't just protection," he said quietly. "This is using power to manipulate an outcome. You understand the difference?" "Of course I understand the difference. You think I haven't been wrestling with exactly that for 2 weeks." I took a shaky breath. But here's what I realized. Daniel had power once. He used it to hurt people weaker than him. You have power now. You're using it to stop him from doing it again. Maybe that's not justice, but it's something. It's accountability when the system failed to provide it. You're rationalizing. I'm surviving. There's a difference. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to name. Finally, Marco spoke, and his voice carried something I'd never heard before. Respect mixed with sorrow. "I'll handle it," The parole board will have everything they need to make an informed decision. Your family won't have to appear or testify. It will be thorough, legal, and permanent. Thank you. Don't thank me, Lily. Not for this. What I'm about to do will keep you safe, but it will also change you. You'll know, for the rest of your life, that you chose power over process, that you used the same tools he did, just with better intentions. His words landed like stones in dark water, ripples spreading outward into implications I'd spend years understanding. I know, I whispered. I know, and I'm choosing it anyway. Does that make me like you? No, he said firmly. It makes you someone who loves her family enough to carry the weight of difficult choices. That's not the same as becoming what you fear. But even as he said it, I wondered if he believed it. Wondered if the distance between protection and domination was really as clear as we wanted it to be, or if it was just a matter of degrees, a slow slide from one to the other that you didn't notice until you'd already arrived. Will you tell me when it's done? Yes. And Lily? His voice softened. You can change your mind. Even tomorrow, even the day of the hearing. The word isn't final until I make it final. I won't change my mind. I know. But I needed you to know you could. We hung up, and I sat in the darkness of my room, feeling the weight of what I'd just set in motion. Outside, Chicago slept. Millions of people making their own impossible choices, carrying their own moral compromises, trying to be good in a world that rarely rewarded goodness with anything except more difficult decisions. I'd handed Marco Santoro $10 when I was 9 and asked him to make my uncle disappear. 7 years later, I'd just asked him to do it again, this time with full knowledge of what it meant, what it cost, what it would make me. And the terrifying part wasn't that I'd made the choice. It was that I knew, with absolute certainty, I'd make it again. The call came 3 weeks later while I was in AP Literature, discussing moral ambiguity in crime and punishment. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marco's voice was neutral, professional. It's done. Parole denied. He'll serve the full sentence, another 8 years minimum. I should have felt relief. Victory. The sweet satisfaction of safety secured. Instead, I felt hollow, like I'd won a battle by burning down the field where it was fought. Thank you, I managed. Don't. His voice carried warning. Don't thank me for this, Lily. We both know what it cost. He hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, at the silence that followed his words, and understood that something between us had shifted irrevocably. We'd crossed from protection into something darker, complicity, maybe, or shared culpability. The clean lines of our relationship had blurred into shadows. I told Mom that evening, watched relief flood her face, watched years of tension drain from her shoulders. She cried, grateful, exhausted tears, and I held her while feeling like a fraud. She thought justice had prevailed through proper channels. She didn't know I'd tilted the scales with a phone call to a man who specialized in making problems disappear. Emma was harder. She came home for the weekend, and I told her in my bedroom with the door closed, watched her process the information, parole denied, 8 more years, we're safe, and saw something complex move across her face. Not quite relief, not quite comfort. How? She asked simply. The parole board reviewed his full history. All of it. How did they get his full history? The stuff that was never prosecuted? She'd always been perceptive, my sister. Always saw the threads connecting events that seemed coincidental. I met her eyes and let her see the truth without speaking it aloud. Lily, she breathed. What did you do? What I had to... That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Emma stood, paced my small room like a cage thing. When she finally turned back, her expression was a mixture of horror and reluctant understanding. You're not a kid anymore, she said. You're someone who makes calls that change lives. Do you understand how terrifying that is? Yes. Do you understand that you can't undo this? That you've stepped into his world now, not just accepting protection, but wielding power? Her words hit like physical blows because they were true. I'd spent 7 years believing I could benefit from Marco's influence while remaining separate from it, clean from it. But power doesn't work that way. It stains everyone it touches, and I just dipped my hands in it willingly. I know what I did, I said quietly, and I'd do it again. Does that make me a monster? Emma's face softened. She sat beside me, took my hand. No, it makes you human. Flawed and frightened and trying your best to protect people you love. But Lily, her grip tightened, you need to be careful. Power is addictive, and the more you use it, the easier it becomes to justify using it again. That night, I tried calling Marco. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail, the first time in 3 years he hadn't answered. I understood the message. He was giving me space to sit with what I'd done, to feel the full weight of the choice without his justifications making it easier to bear. But I didn't need space. I needed to hear his voice, to know that the line between us hadn't been severed by my decision to become complicit in his methods. I left a voicemail. I know you think I need distance right now. I know you think I need to process this alone, but you promised Rule 2, you'd stay reachable, so reach back, please. He called at midnight. I'm here. 2 words, but they carried everything. Acknowledgement, presence, the promise kept even when keeping it was uncomfortable. I don't regret it, I said. I thought I would, but I don't. Does that make me like you? No, he said firmly. It makes you someone who loves fiercely enough to bear the weight of difficult choices. That's not corruption, Lily. That's courage with consequences. Then why won't the hollowness go away? Long silence. Then, quietly, because you're grieving the person you thought you'd be. The one who'd never compromise principles for protection. That person died when you made this choice. You're mourning her. His understanding cracked something open inside me. I cried then, really cried, for the first time since making the call. Cried for the clean moral certainty I'd lost. Cried for becoming someone who could manipulate systems and call it love. Cried for the little girl who'd handed over $10 believing monsters could be heroes, never imagining she might become something in between. It gets easier, Marco said softly, carrying the weight, living with compromise, but it never stops mattering. The day it stops hurting is the day you've actually become what you fear. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll tell me if I cross too far. If I start using power like it's normal, like it's deserved, I promise. His voice carried absolute conviction. I'll always tell you the truth, Lily. Even when it's ugly. Especially then. We stayed on the phone in comfortable silence until I finally fell asleep. Phone still pressed to my ear, connected to the man who'd taught me that sometimes salvation and damnation wore the same face. And the only difference was whether you could live with your reflection in the morning. I graduated from Oak Ridge Academy on a Thursday in May, 3 years after Uncle Daniel's parole was denied, and 8 years after handing Marco Santoro $10 in Grant Park. The girl who'd made that desperate bargain felt like a character from someone else's story. Distant, almost mythical, brave in ways I no longer needed to be. I'd learned different kinds of courage since then. The courage to live with compromise, to carry secrets that weighed more than fear ever had, to accept that protection and power were 2 sides of the same tarnished coin. Northwestern had accepted me for pre-law. Full academic scholarship, earned entirely on merit. I'd made sure of that, turning down 3 opportunities. Marco had tried to arrange until he finally understood that this part of my life had to be mine alone. Emma was finishing her master's in social work, already running support groups for domestic violence survivors. Mom directed patient advocacy programs at Chicago General, her illness so thoroughly managed it rarely crossed her mind anymore. We'd built something real from the ashes of our old life. Something that would stand even if Marco Santoro disappeared tomorrow. But he was there at graduation, standing at the back of the ceremony like he'd stood at every milestone for 8 years. Never intrusive, never demanding recognition, just present, keeping his word in the quietest way possible. I found him afterward in the parking lot, leaning against his car in the afternoon sun. He looked older, more gray, deeper lines, but his eyes were the same, tired, sharp, and inexplicably gentle when they landed on me. "Congratulations," he said. "You came. I always come." We stood in comfortable silence while graduates and families swirled around us, caught up in their own celebrations. I'd prepared a speech, something eloquent about gratitude and growth and moving forward. But standing there, I realized words weren't enough for what needed saying. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. White, expensive paper, an echo of the one I'd handed him 8 years ago. He stared at it like seeing a ghost. "What's this?" Open it. Inside was a $10 bill and a note in my adult handwriting, clear and steady. Thank you for keeping your word. Thank you for teaching me that power without conscience is just cruelty with resources. Thank you for showing me that monsters are just people who've forgotten how to be vulnerable. Consider your debt to that 8-year-old boy fully paid. Marco read it twice, something raw and unguarded crossing his face. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. Lily, I know, but I need you to hear it anyway. You saved us. Not just from Daniel, but from believing we weren't worth saving. You gave us permission to imagine futures we'd never dared to dream. That's worth more than money or protection or anything else you think you owe that little boy you used to be. He folded the note carefully, slipped it back in the envelope with the $10, tucked it in his jacket pocket over his heart like it was something precious. I have something for you too, he said. From his car, he retrieved a small, wrapped box. Inside was a delicate bracelet, white gold, simple, elegant, with a single charm, a tiny key. For unlocking futures, he said quietly. Yours is just beginning. I put it on with shaking hands. The weight of it felt right. Not heavy, not light, just present. A reminder of doors opened and choices made and the complicated mathematics of owing and being owed. I'm trying to step back, Marco said suddenly. From the business, from the life. It's slow. You don't just walk away from what I've built, but I'm trying, because you asked me once what kind of man I wanted to be. And I realized I wanted to be the kind who could look at himself without flinching. Are you there yet? No. But I'm closer than I was the day a 9-year-old girl handed me an envelope and reminded me that mercy was still possible. I hugged him then, the first time I'd ever initiated physical contact. Felt him tense in surprise, then relax, his arms coming up to hold me carefully, like I was something that might break. You're going to do extraordinary things, Lily Carter, he whispered against my hair. And I'm going to watch from a distance and be grateful I got to be part of your story, even in the complicated way I was. When I pulled back, I saw Mom and Emma watching from across the parking lot. Emma raised her hand in a small wave. Acknowledgement, maybe even acceptance. Mom's face was harder to read, but she nodded once. Permission, or at least understanding. They know, Marco asked. They've always known, I said. We just stopped pretending we didn't. He smiled, rare, genuine, transforming his face into something younger. That's growth. That's what you taught me. That secrets are just lies wearing prettier clothes. That the truth, even when it's ugly, is always better than comfortable fiction. Marco looked at the bracelet on my wrist, at the key catching afternoon light. What will you do? With law school? With all of it? Help people who can't help themselves. Protect children in impossible situations. Be the voice for people who've learned silence is safer than speaking. I met his eyes. Be someone a desperate kid could trust with $10 and a prayer. You'll be magnificent at it. I learned from the best. I paused, letting the weight of that land, from all of it, the protection and the compromise, the power and its price. You taught me that morality isn't about clean hands. It's about what you're willing to carry and still wake up human. Somewhere in the distance, Emma called my name. Time for family photos, for celebration, for the normal rituals of graduation day. I started to leave, then turned back. Marco, will I see you again? Only if you need to. That's how it should be. Your life, your terms, your choices. I'm just someone who once made a promise and decided it mattered enough to keep. It mattered, I said firmly. You mattered. You still do. He nodded, but didn't answer with words. Some truths are too heavy for language. I walked away toward my family, toward my future, toward all the complicated choices and moral ambiguities that waited. The bracelet caught light with each step, a key to doors I'd unlock myself, on my own terms, with whatever wisdom I'd earned from being saved by a monster who taught me that labels were less important than actions, that redemption was always possible, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit you needed help, and then learn to live with what that help cost. Behind me, I heard his car start. Didn't turn around, didn't need to. Some guardians stay forever. Others teach you to guard yourself. Marco Santoro had done both, and that, I was learning, was the greatest gift of all. If you made it to the end of this story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from, and click the yellow bell to subscribe to the channel and support us. Keep the adventure going by clicking on the suggested video on your screen.